Thanks everybody for being here. This is a good group. Good to see everybody. Tonight we're going to shift gears a little bit. We've been focusing on solitude and focus and using time wisely. I put all those together. I felt like they were interrelated, but we're shifting gears a little bit to talk tonight about how social media is affecting relationships, and it's infecting and affecting relationships in a big way. Just think about the way we use the term friend these days. I mean, first of all, it wasn't a verb. These days, you friend somebody. Can you imagine 20 years ago saying, I friended my neighbor the other day? You didn't do that 20 years ago, but nowadays, we friend each other. It's just something you do more than something you are. And Instagram and Twitter and others have followers, but Facebook has this deceit of calling your followers friends. And the reason I use the word deceit is because a real friend is so much more than just clicking a name or accepting a request or something like that. There's no commitment really on Facebook, and you can lose them as easily as you can find them. And so I think that's just an example of how it's affecting us. Now, for a more interesting illustration, I'm going to go to this novel by E.M. Forster. It's one of these future dystopian novels. It's really weird. Maybe somebody would call it science fiction. But it was written in 1909, and it's very scary how much he has predicted the current state of affairs. In this novel, the machine stops. Human beings can't live on the surface of the earth anymore. They all live underground in this honeycombed, below the surface existence, and they all have their individual rooms, one compartment per person, and every need that they have for human existence is supplied by this thing called the machine that was invented before anybody remembers. Now, the machine is regarded as omnipotent. It can know everything. It's powerful enough to provide everything. And so people rarely ever leave their compartments. It's not because they can't. They can and sometimes do. But for the most part, they spend all of their days in their individual compartments, and they communicate with one another through the machine. Is this starting to sound familiar? So the story is about a mom named Vashti and her son Kuno. These are funny names. But Kuno messages his mom. And again, this was written in 1909. And he messages her, and somehow they can see each other and communicate. So they have audio and video. And he says, I would like to see you. And she says, what do you mean you're already seeing me? And he makes this statement. He says, I want to see you not through the machine. And that just gives me goosebumps, because I think that he's on to something here that we need to recover today in the age of social media. We are not fully sustained through relationships on social media. Those are not real relationships. We need to see each other not through the machine. There's more to friendship than what the machine can give us. Now, just to talk a little bit about how things are changing, I want to go back to, with apologies to Kayla, I want to go back to Generation Z and talk about some things that are happening with them. And here's just a few statistics. I got all of this from an article. You can find it online. It's in The Atlantic by Gene Twenge. And the article's called, Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation? So it sounds pretty pessimistic. But here's some of the things that researchers have discovered about this younger generation born in the mid-90s to the mid-2000s. They're less likely to date. They don't get out as much with one another. They get their driver's licenses later than previous generations. Teens who get together with friends personally, like face-to-face in reality, that number dropped more than 40% in 15 years, from 2000 to 2005. They're not working as much. They are homebodies. They stay at home most of the time. They're safer, because they take fewer risks, but they're taking fewer risks because they're content to just stay in their bedroom and live their whole life on their phones. And they also are growing up later. They enter adulthood later. Some researchers put it this way: they stay in childhood until well into high school. And so I'm catching some of you nodding your heads. I don't know if you mean to do that openly, but you can seem to be agreeing and noticing these kinds of things. This is what's going on, and a lot of it is due to our technology, and a lot of it's due to social media. There were some interviews done in this article. One young girl, she was 13, she said, "I think we like our phones better than we like actual people." Now, she is onto something there, because one thing she does is she makes a distinction between phone relationships and real life face-to-face relationships. And then she's bringing out something that I hope isn't true, that people are choosing relationships on the phone over the face-to-face relationships. None of us wants that to be true, but we all fear it's getting there. So to start, I want to talk about the value of relationships. I mean, maybe we should weigh this. Are they really all that important? And if so, why? I mean, there are some difficulties with relationships, right? They can be messy, they can be awkward, they can be painful. Everybody knows what it's like to be betrayed by a friend. And a lot of us have trouble building really meaningful relationships in life. Men have a harder time than women. Statistics show that only 2 out of 10 men say that they have close friends, and with women the number's more like 6 out of 10 women. 20% of men, 60% of women say they have close friends. Neither one of those numbers is great. And even marriage, which is the closest possible human relationship that we have available to us on earth, even marriage breaks down on a regular basis. I checked the numbers. The divorce rates are dropping, but it's still every 40 to 50% of marriages break down. And the reason the divorce rates are dropping is people are just choosing not to get married now. There are fewer marriages as well as fewer divorces. So we're having trouble with relationships, and they can be painful, and that's to be expected because even the perfect human being, Jesus Christ, had trouble with relationships in a manner of speaking. It was Jesus who handpicked 12 disciples, and one of his own handpicked disciples betrayed him. Didn't just betray him, but betrayed him with a kiss. And it reminded the gospel writers, namely John, of this psalm from Psalm 41, verse 9, which was spoken by David to begin with. So David too knew betrayal and the difficulty of relationships. "Even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me." So relationships are hard. People get hurt. What's the point? Maybe this is a good trend away from real relationships to the safety of social media. It's certainly the temptation of social media. It gets us out of that awkwardness and the riskiness. We have more control, we feel like. When somebody sends you a message, maybe sometimes it's confrontational, we can take a few minutes to think about what we're going to say. We can edit what we're going to say before we push send. We can think carefully, and we feel that we have more control. Maybe it's a better solution. Well, of course it's not. And the Bible brings that out very plainly. From the very beginning, when God created humankind, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, he said, "It is not good that the man should be alone." And that's where we read about the creation of woman as a helper suitable to Adam, bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Marriage was generated that day, and we still live by those principles. That's still God's plan for marriage. Also, you have some Proverbs, and we'll be talking about several of them tonight. I talk about the value of friendship, and here's one of the best known, Proverbs 17:17. "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity." Science has actually done some research into friendship and has found some interesting things. One finding is that lonely people, and I don't know how they measure that, because I guess everybody is lonely to some degree, But lonely people, by their standards, lived shorter lifetimes than people that could count true relationships in their lives. And there are some other things here that I want to share with you as well. If I can get the page turned. They also found, this was a study by Carnegie Institute of Technology, that even in fields like engineering, where there's a lot of science and math involved, about 15% of a person's success was due to their technical knowledge, and 85% was due to their ability to interact with other people. Another study that I read found that a lot of people who lose their jobs, most of the time it has something to do with their social skills, or lack thereof, I should say. So these relationships are having an impact on careers, on success, on things you wouldn't normally connect to the ability to have friendships and relationships with other people. It makes people valuable. Even the most insignificant people have great value because of friendships. Robert Louis Stevenson said, "So long as we're loved by others, I would almost say that we are indispensable, and no man is useless when he has a friend." I really like that. Henry David Thoreau also said that he used to wake up in the night to think of friendship and its possibilities. Friendship and its possibilities. Friendship opens up all kinds of doors, opens up all kinds of opportunities. And there are so many examples in the Bible. Where would Ruth be without Naomi? Where would David be without Jonathan? You can finish these sentences, right? Where would Paul be without Barnabas, Timothy, Silas? Where would Mark be without Barnabas? So we can connect a lot of people to Barnabas. But the Bible shows you through real life examples how people found possibilities and opportunities simply because they had relationships in their lives. Now, we've talked in here, when we talk about focus and using our time wisely, we've talked about not wasting time on worthless things. And I believe we talked about the value of life and the value of a soul. What's worth more than a soul? Jesus in Matthew 16:26, what shall a man give in exchange or in return for his soul? And what's a friendship? Here's a biblical definition of friendship. And you get this from a couple of passages. Deuteronomy 13:6, a friend is one who is as your own soul. And this is where the term soulmate comes from. That's the best definition of a friend I've ever seen. A person who is like your soul. And that, of course, reminds you of David and Jonathan, right? Because it says of them in 1 Samuel 18:1 that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and David loved Jonathan as his own soul. So that's the biblical definition of friends. They're people who share a soul. And if the soul is important, then friendship is important because it gets right down to the soul. So we need to think about that and talk about real friendships. And I want to spend the rest of our time, I'm being careful how I say this. I hope you take this with a grain of salt. We're going to talk about how to make friends. I don't know if I can really give you a guarantee on how to make friends, but the Bible has some pretty good advice on it. And so we're going to look at this, and there are 2 or 3 points to be made along this line. So here's the first thing on making friends. These are the 3 points we're going to go over. So here's the first one. First of all, get interested in other people. Get your focus off of yourself and get interested in other people. Dale Carnegie, wrote that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And in that book, he said, you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by being interested only in yourself. Good advice. And it's the cliche, if you want to make friends, you be a friend, right? And that's very important. Now, the challenge of social media is that does social media direct you to friends? It claims to do that. It's social networking. You connect, right? But what does it wind up doing? it turns us into self-centered monsters a lot of time. Not all of us. I know a lot of people can control that, but the tendency is to want to post about yourself and put pictures up about yourself. Not that that's always wrong, but to focus on yourself and what kind of feedback you are getting, and how many likes you have, and how many people are following you, and all of those things are real obsessions for a lot of people, real problems. A lot of times when we have a habit of checking it over and over and over again, it's because we're inwardly focused. And the very thing that we think is going to help us connect actually pulls us away from one another and makes us more disconnected and lonely, because it's causing us to gaze inward and look at ourselves. I want to share with you some things from Andrew Sullivan. I thought this was great. He talks about this concept of being interested in others in terms of reciprocity, which is just, if you want somebody to give you, what is going on? Okay, there it is. If you want somebody to give to you, you must give to them. That's what reciprocity means. Now here's what he says. Unlike a variety of other relationships, friendship requires an acknowledgement by both parties that they are involved, or it fails to exist. So he's going to illustrate this in a moment. But what he's saying is, other relationships, you can have a commitment just on one side. But in friendship, both sides have to be interested in the other person. Reciprocity. He says, one can admire someone who is completely unaware of our admiration. Maybe you have a movie star you really like, or a musician, or a leader, and a world leader, or something like that. That person doesn't even have to be aware of you for you to admire that person. And he says the integrity of that admiration is not lost. So it works in that kind of relationship. He gives some more examples. We'll just wait on the TV. Okay, whenever you're ready. Go. One may even employ someone without knowing who it is specifically one employs. Isn't that right? Now, it doesn't work so well for Jason and some of you small business owners, but the bigger the corporation, you can certainly employ people that you don't have any idea who they are. They're just a number. And it works. A relationship works. One may be related to a great aunt whom one has never met and may fail ever to meet. And one may, of course, fall in love with someone without the beloved being aware of it or reciprocating the love at all. So those kinds of things happen all the time. And they work, but none of these are examples of friendship. He goes on. And in all these cases, the relationships are still what they are. Whatever the attitude of the other person in them, they're relationships of admiration, business, family, or love. But friendship is different. Friendship uniquely requires mutual self-knowledge. Both need to know each other and will. Both need to be committed to it. It takes two competent, willing people to be friends. You can't impose a friendship on someone. You can't pick somebody out and say, you're going to be my friend. They say, no, I'm not. You can't do that. Although you can impose a crush, a lawsuit, an obsession, if friendship is not reciprocated, it simply ceases to exist, or rather, it never existed in the first place. So what is he saying there? He's saying that you can't have friends unless you're willing to be interested in the other person. Now, the Apostle Paul said this same thing in Philippians. If you go to Philippians chapter 2, let's look at that really quickly. The church of Philippi, people look at the letter to the Philippians, they say, this is Paul's happiest letter. And it is. It's full of joy. Joy's mentioned in every chapter. It's just 4 chapters long, and joy, I think joy, rejoice, words like that are mentioned like 16 times. But there were problems in the church of Philippi, just like there are problems in every church, and the problems were relationship problems. And so in chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, he gives this advice. Get interested in other people. He says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. More significant than yourself. Look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Now, that seems to go against our instincts, and especially on social media. But the people who follow that advice, whether they're following the commands of Paul or they're just instinctively doing it, or they, figured this out by following God and knowing how self-giving God is, people who are self-giving are people that have the most relationships in life. Julie and I were talking to her daughter about this tonight. You lose nothing by giving of yourself, but you can lose everything by trying to take and seize. So get interested in other people. That's the first thing. Number 2, don't worry about popularity. Now, one thing that all social media accounts do is they keep track pretty high up on the feed of how many followers you have. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. How many of you know how many followers you have? Probably not many people in this class. But if I were across the hall over here, and I might have some people that actually know how many followers they have. And I think Twitter is the one that ranks people. I checked. I'm a little embarrassed to do this, especially with Patrick filming it, but Katy Perry has the most followers. She has like 106 million followers on Twitter. I am not one of them. Not a huge fan. But, there are a lot of other very lonely people who are on that top 10 list of Twitter. It's interesting if you compare it, the celebrities with the most followers to what's going on in the news in their lives, and their lives are total wrecks, but they've got millions of followers. So that's a very easy illustration to understand that having a lot of friends or followers does not equal happiness. Popularity, it just really doesn't matter. Victor Hugo called popularity glory's small change. There's a little glory in it, but it's just small change. It's easy. We need to understand that we're not going to be included in everything. And I think that was easier to take before we had to see, in real time almost, pictures of people we thought were our friends having a good time without us. But nowadays, you might have this night at home and you're bored and you're scrolling through. I don't know who has time to be bored anymore, but you go home and you're bored and you're just scrolling through and, hey, there are my friends at the movies. They didn't invite me to the movies. And this is so common, this new anxiety that we have that's been made possible by technology. There's a name for it, fear of missing out. Have you ever heard this, fear of missing out? The acronym is FOMO. Do you have FOMO? Kayla's heard of it before. FOMO is a problem, right, Kayla? Fear of missing out. If you don't know the name for it, if you're on social media much, you probably felt it before. And there's something about the pictures and the posts that take our ability to reason away from us. But there are 100 reasons why you probably weren't invited. I mean, think about all the things that go through your mind when you're planning something. A lot of times, it just happens spontaneously. And maybe you weren't on that person's mind at the time. No big deal. Doesn't mean you're no longer their friend. People can have fun without you from time to time. But we start keeping count. We start keeping records. How many times has that person been with my friend? How many times have I been? And you start getting into that, and social media helps you keep track of that. It archives all that information, which it doesn't do it consistently, but it does it enough to where our imaginations run away with us, and we have all of this jealousy. And last time I checked in the Bible, jealousy is a problem, not an attribute that we're supposed to develop. It's not in the fruit of the Spirit. You can come through all the series we're doing, and we'll never get to jealousy. It's up in the list above it, works of the flesh. Here is a verse that's often misapplied. Proverbs 18:24. The King James says, "A man that hath friends must show himself friendly, but there's a friend sticks closer than a brother." And you'll notice this translation, this ESV, is different. A man of many companions may come to ruin. Now the King James is saying the same thing, but it sounds like the King James is saying what we said in the last point. If you want to have friends, you need to be a friend. But here's what Solomon was really saying. If you want a lot of friends, you have to make some compromises to get there. The more friends you have, the more people you got to keep happy, the more you dull out the corners, the edges of your life to be all things to all people. And you eventually come to ruin at some point. But there is, notice the singular compared to the plural. Many companions contrasted with a friend who sticks closer to that than a brother. Now, do you want to come to ruin from being popular, or do you want to have somebody that sticks closer to you than a brother? I'll do that some other time. Okay. Third point. Don't pursue friends. Pursue a purpose. Think about how you have made friends in your life. Your closest friends, where did they come from? More than likely, they came from a situation like this, sitting next to them in class, worshiping with them, working with them, serving with them, living next door to them, doing life together. That's how you make your friends. Have you ever really made a friend? Now, somebody may disprove me, so see me after class if you have proof against this. But has anybody ever made a friend by just going to saying, that person's attractive and seems to like the same things I like, I'm going to go after that person? That gets back to what we were talking about a while ago with reciprocity. Hey, let's be friends. No, you're freaking me out. You're coming on way too strong. Your closest friends come from having the same purpose with people. And C.S. Lewis really put this well. I couldn't put the whole quote on the screen, but I have it here. I want to read this, share this with you. He says this. This is in his book, The Four Loves. That is why those pathetic people who simply want friends can never make any. The very condition of having friends is that we should want something else besides friends. Where the truthful answer to the question, do you see the same truth, would be, I see nothing and I don't care about the truth, I only want a friend. No friendship can arise, though affection, of course, may. There would be nothing for the friendship to be about, and friendship must be about something. Friendship must be about something. He says, must be about something, even if it were only an enthusiasm for dominoes or white mice. Those who have nothing can share nothing. Those who are going nowhere can have no fellow travelers. If you're going nowhere, you're not going to have any fellow travelers. So start going somewhere. Find a purpose. And one thing that is really interesting about this, if you notice that the friends you've got around you are not the best people for you, change your purpose, get a higher purpose, and your friendships will rise with the purpose. The greater your purpose, the better your relationships will be around you. So I really think this helps. Now, all of us need relationships. All of us need friends. Jesus needed friends. People don't think that, but look at Mark 3:14. It talks about him appointing 12 apostles. He says, he appointed 12 that he might send them out to preach and that they might be with him. I just find that fascinating. And then you have the examples of Lazarus and Mary and Martha, and of course the 12 disciples, and the inner circle of Peter, James, and John. And then the great truth is that Jesus invites us to be his friends. You are my friends, he says in John 15:14, if you do what I command you. And then what did he command us to do? You go back up to verse 12 of John 15. Love one another even as I've loved you. If we love each other and we enter into a covenant relationship with Jesus, Jesus says, I'm your friend. And so all over the world, people are dealing with loneliness, and social media is looked to as the solution for this, and it's only exacerbating the problem. And so we've got to get back into the real world of messy, awkward, tough, risky friendships, because that's really what makes life rich and fulfilling. So that's where we're going to stop tonight, talking about friendships. Don't forget the do not call numbers if you didn't write them down. Miss Iris made a whole bunch of them. You can just pick them up and take them with you. Dial that in, and that'll keep the scammers off of you, at least for a little while. Thanks, everybody, for your attention.